what we've seen in recent years within evangelical circles has been almost an apology for the quote-unquote fire and brimstone preaching of the past.
Yeah.
And I will say that the sort of revivalistic era that swept through, and we see that in church history, it brought with it a lot of really bad, methods and techniques. I mean, you can just look at worship philosophy was greatly influenced by the revivalistic movement, but also the pulpit and the preaching was as well. And so in order to get away from that, which I think in many ways we do need to get away from some of those measures and some of those methods.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that we have to throw the doctrine of hell out the window with it.
Yeah.
I think that's true. I don't think there's any one thing, but there's a number of things. That's key. I think that's a great observation, a reaction against actually abusive preaching regarding hell. But then just the influence of the church growth movement and seeker methodology and the idea that in order to reach people, you have to do so in a winsome, loving, gracious way, which of course there's truth to that, but you don't ignore the reality of judgment and holiness and the very nature of hell itself without it. Because again, if you lose that, I think you mentioned one of the first texts you mentioned in Matthew 25 where Jesus is talking about hell. What strikes me about many of the biblical discussions of hell is that eternal judgment is set right alongside eternal salvation and eternal life. You lose one, you lose the other.
Yeah.
So we want to emphasize eternal life, right? That makes us happy.
That's a great point.
And absolutely, eternal life, I mean, that's a wonderful benefit of the gospel, but you cannot lose eternal judgment when it's set right side by side. And if you lose that, you lose eternal life. But Josh, you mentioned earlier, if you're actually preaching the text, you're going to preach both. You have to preach both. And you're going to do so in a way that's not abusive and not manipulative like we've seen in the past, but it's an essential core element of what the truth of the gospel is.